Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Circling Seattle Sports on Converge. I am your host, as always, Charles Hamaker. Busy week. Seahawks had their Week 7 matchup. Well, since we had the Saints on Monday Night Football last week, we have both that game and the Jaguars game. We had a couple Sounders games going on, nothing going on, and Mariners are Storm World at the current moment as they're both going through their off seasons. But we did have Kraken and Rain games to go through as well. So another jam-packed week. But with that being said, just a little quick sports fact just for the general sports world. On Sunday, it was the first ever time that there were MLB, NBA, NHL, NFL, NWSL, and MLS games all taking place on the same day. So that is cool to see, that sort of historical sports equinox taking place this past Sunday on Halloween, actually. But, that's just a little cool sports fact there. So we will get into our news for Converge Sports Weekly here the week of October 26th through November 2nd as we look at the first of the two Seahawks games that we're going to check out. Week 7 versus the Saints on Monday Night Football. The Seahawks would lose that game 10-13. It is the first time in a decade that Seattle has lost 3 straight games and the first 0-3 start at home in nearly 30 years. So not exactly ideal. The team simply beat itself this game. Horrible offensive execution, a failure to stop the best player in the field in Alvin Kamara, and crucially timed penalties really hit Seattle hard and essentially rendered, for lack of better words, the team shot itself in the foot. The offense remained horrid, 167 yards passing and 90 yards on the ground. Geno Smith was sacked 5 times. Bad offense put kicker Jason Myers in position to fail, having him kick into the rain and wind in Seattle on that Monday night. Myers goes 1 for 3 on field goals. Those 6 points obviously loom large as you see the score on your screen, being a 3-point differential. New Orleans beat Seattle in every offensive team stat. The defense did their job. You can see New Orleans held to 13 points. If you look at any other New Orleans team in the past decade, New Orleans has been an offensive juggernaut. So to hold them to 13 points is, the defense did their job. The lone spot for criticism on the defensive end would be not holding Alvin Kamara after his big first half. You should see Alvin Kamara having a big game at halftime, say, hey, we got to stop the best player on the field. That didn't happen. So that game was just really frustrating and tough to deal with. You're playing a good team and you have a chance to beat them. This is a game that you could have won. It's not like the Minnesota game where it was just a wash. You drop an egg, horrible execution all around, right? Similar to most of the games that Seattle has played this year, this game was within reach, and you could argue, obviously, if Russell Wilson was involved, Seahawks win this game. I mean, it's a 3-point game. I would say that Russell Wilson accounts for more than 3 points. But again, obviously, we are dealing with that injury right now. And that New Orleans game just completely frustrating from, the poor execution on the offensive side of the ball to those crucial timed penalties that really didn't do Seattle any favors. And we move over to Week 8 versus the Jaguars, a game that you absolutely needed to win in convincing fashion as well. If you didn't win this Jaguars game in, a blowout effectively, it would have been disappointment and I would say cause for concern. But Seattle avoids that, winning 31-7. At halftime, former head coach Mike Holmgren was honored, becoming the 14th member of the Ring of Honor. The Seahawks did their job, and they beat a bad Jaguars team. The defense has been improving ever since that second half of the Steelers game, as I sort of spoke about against the Saints there. They held the shutout until the fourth quarter when Jacksonville was able to get a touchdown finally. And this gives you positive momentum heading into the bye week. Good returns on the horizon. Seattle will look to add Russell Wilson and D. Eskridge after the bye week, but that is to talk about in injury-related news. So overall, this was a game that you needed to come in and take care of business and really just shellac the Jaguars, and you did that. Frustrating game against the Saints, and you really need to, I guess, channel all that and just have a complete game against Jacksonville, and you did. So good momentum heading into the Week 9 bye. We'll go into stat leaders really quick versus the Saints as we switch over back to the Saints. Geno Smith had 12 completions on 22 attempts for 167 yards and a touchdown. Rushing, Alex Collins led with 16 carries for 35 yards. DK Metcalf led in receiving with 2 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. In the tackle department, Bobby Wagner had 7 total tackles and 5 solo. In turnovers, Jordan Brooks recovered a fumble. And then since we're not sticking on the Saints here, we'll get players of the game out of the way. Versus the Saints, DK Metcalf, he had the only touchdown for Seattle on an 84-yard reception. And then defensive side of the ball, Jordan Brooks made a good deflection in the end zone to prevent a touchdown, and had a fumble recovery. And is also 11th on the NFL tackle list right now for the entirety of the league. So a bright spot there. And then we go into the Jaguars stats. Geno Smith completed 20 of his 24 attempts for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. Geno being efficient there. Rushing Alex Collins again with 10 carries for 44 yards, leading the way in these past 2 weeks. Receiving end, Tyler Lockett had a big game similar to his first 2 weeks, 12 receptions for 142 yards. So Lockett getting back involved in the offense and similar to his first 2 weeks. Tackles-wise, Bobby Wagner had 14 total tackles, 7 solo, now pushing himself into second in the NFL in total tackles. And then in the turnover department versus the Jaguars, Quandre Dix had 1 interception to push his interception number to 3 this year. And he is the only player in the past 5 seasons to record 3 or more interceptions each year. And then for players of the game, on the offensive side of the ball, I had Geno Smith against the Jaguars. Efficient, really took care of business. Played his best game, and you could argue 4 years, considering that Geno hasn't played meaningful snaps in 4 years, before this season. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I had Quandre Dix. Quandre is a key part of this secondary. Usually in the secondary, if you don't hear somebody's name talked about a lot, it's a good thing. You don't want to hear them called. You don't want to have them mentioned. Their main purpose is to shut down their part of the field. Or, in Quandre's case, he's somebody that can get involved in the run game as well. And he's shown that since Seattle acquired him in 2019 for only a 5th-round pick from Detroit. So Geno Smith, Quandre Dix for the Jaguars game there. Best game of Geno's tenure so far here in Seattle. And now you could, hopefully with this news about injuries that we will get to next, maybe, great to have Geno. He had some good moments, but hopefully this is like the end of the time that we see him play any meaningful snaps the rest of the season. Heading into injury news here, we have some big injury updates. Normally this slot is for stat leaders, but considering how important and decisive these injuries are, as well as the fact that we had a lot of stats to go over, I figured it was best to go over injury updates. So you can see here where some of these main players stand, but we're going to go over them in order. Prior to game time, we had injury updates for Chris Carson, Dee Eskridge, and Russell Wilson. Wilson is way ahead of schedule. Carson had no timeline prior to this game against the Jaguars. Pete Carroll stating that due to his neck injury, he was not sure if Carson would be able to play again this season. It had no timeline for him. So remember, that is before Sunday against the Jaguars. Dee Eskridge is ready to play after the bye week. Eskridge had traveled to Florida to see a specialist to help him recover from his concussion and is back in Seattle now. For game day inactive, safety Marquise Blair was out that game. Cornerback Bless Austin, center Dakota Shepley, left tackle Stone Forsyth, tight end Taylor Mabry, and defensive end LJ Collier all joined Blair as game day inactives. And LJ Collier, a note on him, it is the 6th time in 8 games that he has been inactive, a healthy scratch for the Seahawks. Looking at post-game, as we get into our slide here, safety Marquise Blair suffered a significant knee injury against the Saints. He underwent surgery and is going to miss the rest of the season. So Blair suffering another season-ending injury this year, similar to last year, will be out for the rest of the year. Quarterback DJ Reed had some kind of groin strain against the Jaguars. His MRI came out clean, and Pete Carroll said that he should be fine. Quarterback Russell Wilson has really healed tremendously. He had his pin removed from his finger on November 1st, and he is expected to come back against the Packers. That is still sort of not solidified, but it's where we're on track to be here. And then Chris Carson is expected to practice when the team returns from the bye week and intends to play versus the Packers. It's always really interesting when Pete Carroll gives an injury update on a player because his wording is always can be taken a couple ways, right? You can see there with the Chris Carson news prior to Jaguars game time, it sounded like Chris Carson wasn't going to come back this season at all due to that neck injury, right? Neck injuries are serious. You don't want to mess with your neck. And then after the Jaguars game, we learned on November 1st, he's going to practice when the team comes back from the bye week and is intending to play versus the Packers in week 10. Very different sides of the story there. But, a healthy Chris Carson is good news for Seattle, but obviously that Nick injury is going to loom large, I would imagine, for the rest of the season for Carson. So, in team-related notes, on October 27th, center Brad Lundblade was added to the practice squad and quarterback Danny Etling was released. In league-related news, NFL is considering combine bids for 2023. Los Angeles, Dallas, and Indianapolis are all being considered to bid on the 2023 draft combine. The NFL is pushing up when coaches can be interviewed. Potential coaching candidates can be now interviewed in the final 2 weeks of the regular season as opposed to around playoff time and after the Super Bowl. The NFL is enhancing its Rooney Rule. The league will require 2 external minority interviews for GM and coordinator jobs. The Washington football team scandal continues. Washington football team accusers want a probe to be released. The former employees of the team that have accused the team of workplace harassment want the investigation findings to go public. And the NFL would respond to that. Roger Goodell justified the decision of not releasing these findings by claiming that Dan Snyder has already been held accountable for the following investigation. So that news continues to roll on, and we will continue to keep you updated on that situation. As we look into the record and standings for our Seahawks here, the Seahawks sit at a 3-win and 5-loss record. They're only 1.5 games out of a playoff spot, which is pretty wild to consider. They are 4th in the NFC West at this current spot, and looking ahead, Week 9, a bye week. So people have the team has a chance to get rested. Some happy returns coming and preparation for a big game against the Packers coming up in Green Bay. It's always a big deal when you play Green Bay, especially at Lambeau Field. And if you remember, the Seahawks historically are not good at Lambeau Field. So it would be nice to really turn that corner, especially as you continue to fight for a playoff spot. But with that being said, always tough to play in Lambeau and go in there and take on Aaron Rodgers. Also, quick note before we head into Mariners news here. The NFL trade deadline passed about 30 minutes ago, and the Seahawks did not make any resounding news. So unless something goes through late or we get news of it late, Seahawks did not make any trades at the trade deadline and will stay put with their current roster at this time. Heading into our Seattle Mariners news, it is the offseason. Really don't have much going on. The only thing that is of note is awards. With that being said, JP Crawford was nominated for the Gold Glove Award at the shortstop position. JP led the American League shortstops in fielding percentage with .981, putouts with 222, and he was second in American League shortstops in assists, 388, and double plays started with 88. If Crawford wins, he will become the 10th player in club history to win multiple Gold Glove Awards with the Mariners. The announcement about that decision, about who will win Gold Gloves, will come on November 7th. And just a quick side note about the Mariners here. Ty France, who played first base for the majority of the season for the Mariners, was snubbed. I can say that with full confidence. At the end of the year, Ty ranked second in American League first baseman in defensive runs saved, first among AL first basemen in ultimate zone rating per 150 games, and finished with 4.8 fielding runs above average. Not really sure how you can look at all those firsts and that second in terms of those stats and really say we're not even going to nominate him, not even going to be nominated, not even going to be in the finalists. So I can say that was a snub. Just hoping at this point the JP wins that award. Looking into our Seattle Sounders now is, there's the only thing that we have to look forward to for the Mariners is free agency. But I will caution you, in the potential that this happens, there may be a holdout by the Players Association in the MLB. So that's something to note. It could mean that we could see a pushback of the season and of free agency. That's just worst case scenario at this point. The winter meetings start in early December, and all of that discussion should be discussed at that current point in time. And best case scenario would be that all gets sorted out. Looking into our Seattle Sounders here, over the past week, they played on October 26th and November 1st, both of them versus the LA teams. On October 26th at LAFC, Seattle would travel down and lose that game in disappointing fashion, 0-3. No player of the game there. I mean, this was a game that was really tough to look at and watch. Seattle was just dominated. flat out. The Sounders did have a couple returns in this game. Brad Smith returned after dealing with an ACL injury. Nico Ladero came back after a setback with his knee injury. LA is a team that is, fighting to keep their playoff spot alive. And they really took it to the Sounders, who, just a few weeks ago, were the resounding number one team in the Western Conference. And now that is really up in the air. November 1st versus the LA Galaxy, the Sounders would draw that game at 1-1. Player of the game would be Christian Roldan, 2 shots, and drew the game-tying penalty kick. That being said, I have levels for concern with the Sounders, okay? In the past 5 games that Seattle has played, they have not won a single game. They have not collected 3 points in any of those games. They have either lost those games or tied those games. And considering that you've had a slim lead over Sporting Kansas City for number 1 in the Western Conference all year, it's not ideal, and it's not a good thing, for lack of better words, and I don't want to say bad words here. Seattle really is looking to get a strong result in their next game to finish out the regular season on decision day in the MLS in Major League Soccer. But, a few weeks ago, even last week, you had the opportunity to decide your own fate. If you win out and you take care of your own business, you don't have to worry about what Kansas City is doing. You don't have to worry about what Colorado is doing. Now you have to worry about both of them, and you have to worry about winning your own game. So, some hiccups in this road to the playoffs for the Sounders so far, but this can all be resolved come playoff time. But that's another thing that we have to get to after the final game of the regular season. In injury news, Jordan Morris returned versus the Galaxy, as well as Raul Ruidiaz. So you get 2 big spark plugs there. 2, you could argue, when healthy, or best players return to the pitch for Seattle on November 1st versus the Galaxy. As we head into team notes here, the MLS Award Nominees were presented over the past week. The Sounders representatives for the following awards were announced. For MVP of the league, João Paulo was the Sounders representative. Defender of the year, Yeimar Gomez Andrade was the Sounders representative. And Humanitarian of the year, Stefan Fry, gets the nod there. So it would be really cool to see JP win the MVP award, or Yeimar get Defender of the Year, or especially Stefan Fry get Humanitarian of the Year. But that will all be decided at a later date. And I would say there are more important things at hand. Getting into league notes here, if you remember what we talked about last week with the Sounders and how Sporting goalkeeper Tim Melia rock bottomed Christian Roldan and did not get a yellow for it, the decisive action and review of that play has come out by pro referees. And Melia was only suspended 1 game for his body slam of Christian Roldan. For perspective, a red card in that situation would have netted Melia a 3-game suspension and would have really given Sporting Kansas City issues, considering that they needed to win these games to lock up and secure first place in the Western Conference. In a game against Minnesota where Melia was going to be rested anyway, they were able to wash away that 1-game suspension, and Melia gets away scot-free. So that is frustrating, and really gives a bad look to the MLS and Major League Soccer as a whole, that you put an interaction with a celebrity over the safety of your own players. Not much to say about that. That is frustrating. So moving into the next game for the Sounders, they will play on November 7th at the Vancouver Whitecaps with a 3 p.m. kickoff. The Sounders sit at a 17-win, 8-draw, 8-loss record. They are currently first in the Western Conference with 59 points. Just 1 above KC, but 1 point can be nothing really, as Kansas City has 2 games to play and the Sounders only have 1. One of those games for Kansas City comes against the worst team in the league, Austin FC. So difficult there, to say the least. As we move into our Kraken, as there is no Storm news to report at this current moment, over the past week, the Kraken finished out the rest of their homestand, playing 3 games and then 1 on the road against Edmonton. On October 26th, at home versus the Canadians, Seattle won that game 5-1. Player of the game would be Brandon Tanev with 2 goals, 2 points, a 3+- and 3 shots on goal. Seattle beats Montreal played Montreal for the first time in about 100 years. Montreal is actually who the Seattle Metropolitans beat for the Stanley Cup way back in 1917. On October 28th versus the Minnesota Wild, Seattle win that game 4-1. Player of the game would be Hayden Fleury with 2 goals. That is the first multi-goal game ever for Hayden Fleury, so congratulations to Hayden there. October 31st versus the New York Rangers, Seattle would lose that game 3-1. Player of the game would be Jordan Eberle with 1 goal, the only goal for Seattle in that game. And then November 1st at the Edmonton Oilers, Seattle would lose that game 5-2. Player of the game would be Jaden Schwartz, 1 goal, 1 point, 4 shots on goal, and 2 hits. So I think in the past few weeks I've talked about the Kraken. There's been some frustration and some early concern and some panic, I would say. I kind of tossed that to the side and said, hey, this is a young team. This is a franchise that is an expansion team. They're going to take some time to learn about each other and get acclimated as teammates, right? We saw the culmination of that, in these past few games, beating Montreal bad. Montreal's a bad team anyway, but beating Minnesota good by 3 goals, playing a tight game against New York that you probably could have tied and maybe won in overtime if a puck had been a few inches closer to the goal. And then Edmonton. Edmonton's a really good team, for those of you who don't know. They have one of the best players in the NHL in Connor McDavid, amongst others. And that game was close, too, until late in the third period when Edmonton really sort of poured it on and broke away. Now, what I have to say to you about the Kraken this week is that they are oh so close to being a great team. They're a good team right now, okay? Things are really coming together. They're putting a lot of shots on goal. You've got Philip Grubauer really settling in. Adam Larson and Jeremy Lauzon are really settling in as the 2 starting defensemen, right? It's just about finishing and playing better in the power play. As I mentioned, a lot of shots put up against those 2 teams, against New York and Edmonton. Against New York, Seattle outshot the Rangers 32-18, right? A lot of quantity there. New York just got better quality of shots. And in that game, Seattle was close to tying it up late in the third period. The puck was just mere inches away from crossing the line and being a goal. And after New York was able to clear that, they were able to get an empty net goal. So Seattle's on the cusp. They just need to work on finishing a little bit more and getting quality shots on goal, as well as the power play. Seattle is ranked 30th in the NHL in power play, which is, as you can tell, 30 out of 32. It's not good. And for those of you who don't know hockey, I'm still learning myself. Power play is when the opposing team gets a penalty on them, whether that's high sticking, slashing, all the other things that we could go over, right? When the other team gets a penalty and one of their players has to go in the penalty box, so then that team has to play a man or 2 down in some cases, and you get a better chance at scoring, right? You'd think that'd be an advantage, and to most teams who are able to play the power play well, it is. Seattle, not so much. Seattle's struggling on the power play so far. And it's not for lack of power play. Seattle's forced a lot, and they often have more power play opportunities than the teams that they're playing, or in the game against Edmonton's case, the same amount. They're just not taking advantage. So, what we'll take from this week, right, and hope to see over these next 2 games this next week, is we hope to see better finishing, and hopefully maybe the puck bounces our way a little bit. Seattle's been unlucky, as well as better power play possessions. So those 2 things, finishing, power play. Remember that for next week. In injury-related news, October 31st, assistant coach Paul McFarland and forward Jared McCann both entered the NHL's COVID-19 protocol and would both miss the Rangers and Edmonton games. Having Coach McFarland, who is actually the coach for power play situations, as well as Jared McCann, who has the most points, or who did have the most points on the team, to miss both those guys, pretty big. And you could argue that maybe those results against Edmonton and New York would be different if you had both of those guys. So regardless, looking into the next week for the Kraken here on November 4th, they will play the Buffalo Sabres here at home at Climate Pledge Arena with a 7 p.m. Pacific time puck drop. And then November 6th at the Arizona Coyotes with a 7 p.m. Pacific time puck drop, the first time that Seattle will play Arizona on the road. The Kraken sit at a 3-win, 6-loss, 1 overtime loss record, recording 7 points so far and sitting at 8th in the Pacific Division at the current moment. Heading over to our OL Reign here, over the past week, the Reign played their last game of the season at Kansas City. The Reign would win that game 3-0. Player of the game would be Eugenie Le Sommer with 2 goals, recording a brace there. A big game for Seattle. as if they won this game, right, going into this game, they would secure second place in the NWSL table, guaranteeing them a first-round bye and a home playoff game in the semifinal. They would do that in convincing fashion, really taking care of a Kansas City team who has played spoiler, for a couple teams over the past few weeks, beating the Reign in the middle of the Reign hot streak earlier in the year, tying Portland, beating North Carolina. So Kansas City has really been playing up, and maybe it is a sign for their future. But in terms of this year, they've really been playing spoiler. That being said, the Reign were able to lock up second place in the NWSL and guarantee that they get that home playoff game and a week of extra rest. Also, sort of exciting news, for the league as a whole. Kansas City announced at halftime that their team's name is going to be the Current going forward. All this past season, it was the Kansas City NWSL, which is kind of weird. I even asked one of their players, I said, hey, how do you feel about not necessarily having a name at this point? And they said it was kind of weird. But now it has been announced that next year and going forward for the future for the Kansas City team, that they will be announced as the Kansas City Current. For injury-related news, against KC, the only player that was out and listed on the injury report as a whole was Sam Hyatt in COVID protocol. There was no team-related news. In league-related news, there's more news about Kansas City. Kansas City will build the first stadium in the United States specifically for an NWSL team. So that is exciting and hopefully gives Reign fans an idea of what to expect in the coming years as the OL group, the city of Tacoma and the city of Seattle are all looking into potential sites for a stadium, for the Reign here. In other league-related news, the NWSL met the NWSL Players Association demands. The league agreed to meet all 8 of the union's demands following cases involving both verbal abuse and sexual coercion of players following the Paul Riley scandal. And then Washington Spirit executive Larry Best resigned amid ongoing controversy around the franchise's workplace culture. So while we had a great result for the Reign and while playoffs are coming, there is still important news to go over around the league involving getting some of these horrible people out entirely. With that being said, the Reign sit at a 13-win, 3-draw, 8-loss record. They finished second in the league in the regular season with 42 points. And so they get a bye week this upcoming week. But we know that they will play a home semifinal game on November 14th at noon. So this is my call to action for you here. If you've got time on the 14th, it's just it's not a short drive. But if you want to support women, you want to support women in sports, you want to support a good team, there are a lot of good players here. The Reign will play November 14th at Shaney Stadium at noon against either Washington or North Carolina. Excuse me. Washington, a team that Seattle has had, keep saying Seattle. The Reign have had some difficulty playing this past year as Washington actually won the season series. And North Carolina has been historically, since they joined the league, have been a juggernaut, winning a few titles already. So it's going to be a good matchup. Again, if you can make it out, I know tickets aren't expensive. I would make it out to that Reign game on the 14th. I will be there in the press box covering the game, so I don't know if that's any incentive. Regardless, good past week in Seattle sports, better than the few past weeks we've seen where they've had a lot of teams losing. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, pardon me. And before we head out, I said last week I complimented my director Salman on lighting here, but we're recording this on Tuesday the 2nd. Yesterday was his birthday, so if you do that kind of thing, wish him a late birthday. With that being said, I want to thank everybody, and we will see you again when we return with Circling Seattle Sports on Converge. Until then, take care and be well.